would you like to just give us a case study, briefly, an example of the sort of case you've dealt with that supports the evidence you've been given?
Just a general, yes, I mean, interestingly, today I just received, finally, some 9 months after making a complaint, a response from an STC about a 14-year-old boy who was restrained around 17 times over a 6-month period. He also received around 60 sanctions, so disciplinary warnings during that time, and felt extremely indignant and upset about his behaviour. In that case, lots of the incidents that he complained of concerned quite petty issues, not going to bed, having an argument about whether or not to take your shoes off before you eat, the sorts of things that you would hope in a family environment could be solved amicably. And in fact, if they were not to be solved amicably in a family environment, you might be thinking whether the parents were fit for purpose. So, interesting, 9 months after submitting a complaint, and that in itself was many, many months after seeking disclosure of all the information. Finally, we received a response from the STC in 4 pages, simply saying, well, we don't accept this, which is very concerning. This young person comes from a difficult background and has had lots of problems. He accepts that he is and has been aggressive on occasion, but he also doesn't think that by shouting or being argumentative would suggest that he's going to cause injury to yourself or others.
Final question. You're an expert in this field. You function as a practicing lawyer under the aegis of the Howard League from an office in North London. But institutions containing young people are all over the country.
Yes.
Outside the Howard League and London, is there much expertise among lawyers practicing in the rest of the country so that there is reasonably ubiquitous access not only to justice but to competent justice?
No, and that's a very important issue. First of all, even if there was the expertise, most of the clients that we represent would not be able to pay for it. And the current position with legal aid is that there is no legal aid now, or virtually no legal aid to help children to make complaints. They're expected to do that all by themselves unless you can prove they have a really pressing need to have a lawyer doing that for them. And legal aid for damages claims is extremely difficult to come by. And will virtually, I fear, disappear for low-value claims. And of course, children are not going to have loss of earnings or anything like that. In terms of expertise, partly because the legal aid position is fairly dicey and because it's a fairly specialist area, we are the only national service that deals with, that's dedicated to this kind of work. And there is, I don't think I'm aware of any other lawyers that specialise particularly in this area, so it is a difficult.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to Laura James for getting the ball rolling and with some interesting evidence. I'm sorry, did you want to ask a question? Oh, Baroness, I'm never going to stop Baroness Linklater.
In relation to your comments about the culture that obtains of violence or whatever in STCs, and you said in your opening remarks that you have never received any complaints from a secure children's home.
Yes.
Can you in any way describe the difference in the culture between those two sorts of establishments? And in particular, I wondered if there were perhaps fairly sort of basic things like staff ratios which might make a difference.
Yes, absolutely. The staff ratios are generally much higher. The numbers of children are generally much lower. The ethos is just completely different. Over the past 5 years, I've represented many children, and of course, you know, as a lawyer, there's only so much you can do. But I've had several children who have gone through a secure children's home who have seen absolutely turn their lives around in a way that is so much more difficult to do coming from an STC or a YOY. I had a child released from a secure children's home following parole hearing last year who got 8 GCSEs this summer, and did 8 GCSEs this summer, including a good handful of A's. So, you know, there is a different ethos and a different culture in the secure children's homes and a different approach. The staff tend, in my experience, to have a lower turnover, so they're a more consistent staff body. They tend to have a much stronger focus on the children and child protection issues rather than operational issues.
And just to give a rough idea, what is the sort of difference in staff ratio? I mean, how can you quantify it?
Well, in young offence, and I will I'll ask John to correct me if I'm wrong or not completely up to date. But in a young offence institution, you're looking sometimes at a ratio of 1 to as many as 60, according to some statistics. Whereas in a secure children's home, I think you're looking much more sort of 1 to, I think it's about 5 or 6. But do please correct me if I'm wrong.
There are so many different ways of describing the difference, but the simplest one, I think, is this, that there are, per child, there are 6 times as many face-to-face staff, custody staff, call them what you will, in an STC than in a YOI, and there are 15 times as many face-to-face staff in a secure children's homes than a YOI. That's I'll enter into the record the formal calculation, but that's broadly the difference between the 3 settings.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Laura James. And we will now continue, if Mr. Drew wouldn't mind stepping into the hot seat. There may be a division in the House of Lords shortly, so if I disappear for a few minutes, that's the reason. Because the mover of